Good evening, friends. Welcome to today's study circle meeting on Companies Act. The subject for today's discussion is the provisions of the Companies Act 2013 relating to the directors. To talk on this subject, we have an eminent speaker from the Company Secretaries Institute and a lawyer. I request our Vice Chairman, C.A.K. Babu, to escort the speaker to the dais. And also I request the Vice Chairman Babu to present a welcome flower to the speaker, J. Sundaresan. Friends, it's my great pleasure to introduce the speaker for today's session. Company Secretary J. Sundaresan is graduated from University of Madras with a Bachelor of in General Law from Annamalai University, and he is a member of the Institute of Company Secretaries of India and Association of Secretaries and Managers, Calcutta, Center for Corporate Governance and Institute of Directors. Presently he is in practice in the name and style of J. Sundaresan and Associates. His specialization in corporate consulting and advisory with core focus on due diligence and corporate compliance audit, corporate law due diligence, corporate law audit, corporate governance certification, labor law audit, and writing policies on CSR and corporate governances. His professional experience extends to the areas in social services. He is a board mentor and compliance guru, educating the boards and senior management advisors on issues relating to the governance, compliance and risk. He is a regular speaker at various international forums and conventions and national seminars, and has submitted papers at international conferences of the Institute of Directors, Institute of Company Secretaries of India, and also the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He has launched an initiative, a round table for boards and advisors called A-MAGE, an initiative to disseminate knowledge periodically. He also published a newsletter titled Board Anatomy that brings about the various extents of governance, compliances and risks. He is a principal faculty with the Institute of Directors for their master class program since 2006. He has trained over more than 500 persons for the certificate program. His areas of interest include board governance, directors, dilemma, CSR, board deviances among others, and is rated as the must hear by participants. So I feel all of us are actually fortunate to hear him today. With these words, we would like to welcome Sundaresan once again, and let us have a nice talk today. Over to the speaker.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My usual first liner, which is I'm back. So this time it's going to be edition on chapter 11 and 13, which is on directors and managerial remuneration. Now, where do I start? It's such a lovely chapter, and it's an exhaustive one, of course. And chapter 12, which deals with meetings and powers, has been handled by my friend Dwarkanath, so I'm not getting into the details on 12. But 11 and 13 itself is such an exhaustive chapter that you might be wondering that there are only around 22 sections in chapter 11 and about 10 sections in chapter 13. That is the basic setup as far as these two chapters are concerned. But the content-wise, let me also tell you the content-wise, because 1956, the same thing if you had to look into, it's 252 to section 314. It's almost about 60 sections with, of course, the three chapters put together, which is 11, 12 and 13, which is from 2013. So 252 to 314 of 1956 is what represents chapter 11, 12 and 13. So that in a nutshell is what is the coverage and the comparison between 1956 and 2013. Now, it's something like this. There are not many speakers who have come before me and have spoken or touched upon the issue relating to independent directors. And, basically what I have heard, or most of them speaking, is not so good about the independent directors. But rest assured, this is again a punchline from one of the super hit movies last year. Don't underestimate the power of, it's not the common man, it's the independent directors. That is 149, section 149 for you. And these independent directors, forget what they could not have done or what they have not done, but if I start telling you what all they have done, it is amazing. And to give that additional powers, now what has happened is the government has beautifully come out with a provision which is 149 subsection 12, which is an immunization provision for independent directors, which means after giving all the powers, the qualifications and duties and laying down schedule 4 with the codes and so on and so forth, government has also tactfully introduced that provision which is 149 subsection 12, wherein it tries to immunize the independent director. So let me start off with this particular chapter, which is chapter 11. And in my earlier occasion, I had, in fact, one of the first sessions relating to Companies Act, I had said that for a director, next to God, it is a chartered accountant. Right? That's how an entrepreneur views the chartered accountant as. But as far as this chapter is concerned, if this chapter doesn't exist, chapter on auditors is irrelevant. Because unless and until a director is not born, where is the question of an auditor playing any role? So this is a very, very important chapter as far as provisions are concerned. And going forward, as I open up, the various gamuts of these sections, you will appreciate how important the role of directors is. So what I am going to do is, again, I will not take you through sequentially from 149 to 172 and so on and so forth. I would like to present this in a form of sequence, which you will appreciate how how various sections has come in. Of course, it's a little jumbled up, so you will find it going up and down. But it's okay, the roller coaster, you will love it. And where I am going to start is by introducing this subject. Then we move on to qualification, disqualification. Then we move on to appointments, types. Then we have duties. Then we have remuneration. And finally it will slowly taper down with the closing of secretarial audit and role of a company secretary. So this is the sequence which I am going to maintain as far as you are concerned, so that it makes a little more interesting listening as far as you are concerned, rather than going on a monotonous path of running you through various sections. Let me just ask a few questions before heading on to the main session. Did you know that a director had qualifications? Earlier on, 1956, if you see, there was no qualification. The only qualification required for a director in a light sense was the left hand thumb, which is basically to take it and put it on some document. Then with the introduction of 2006, director identification number became a prerequisite. 2013, if you just get into the details on what all qualification has been prescribed, it's a whole lot of qualification ranging from age criteria to education criteria to, there is about 5-6 criteria which you need to look up even for a qualification. So that is one. Types of directors. If you think that there are only 6 or 8 types of directors, let me tell you, I can just roll up. Any guesses how many types? So 28 types of directors. Executive director, non-executive director, additional director, casual vacancy, then retiring director, non-retiring director, resident director, woman director. You get exhausted with the number of directors which has come into the picture as far as 2013 is concerned on the types. But there are some fantastic provisions. It is not that all is not great. You have 166 which throws up duties. You have 149 which is on independent directors. Then you have provisions relating to remuneration where the board reporting which is relating to 197 subsection 12 which deals with the reporting of the remuneration. So overall it is a fantastic thing as far as 11 and 13 chapters are concerned. So let me get on to the basics as far as today's session is concerned. So we'll move on. Let's see what is the first slide to do with as far as today's session is concerned. Yeah, 149 subsection 1. Which is a fairly simple provision, which is only individuals can be directors. Right? There is no change between 1956 and 2013, so I am not getting into details. It's very simple. 149 subsection 1 subclause A, which deals with minimum directors and maximum directors. Basically, let's start with minimum directors. Again, there is no change. It is 3 and 2. 3 for a public company and 2 for a private company. Then we move on to section 149 subsection 1 subclause B, which deals with maximum number of directors in a company. Now this provision, there is a change. What is the change? Earlier on it was 12, now it has become 50. So the only change as far as that particular provision is concerned is the number has gone up from 12 to 50. And then there is a proviso in 149 subsection 1 which states that to increase the maximum limit, all that you require is a special resolution. So this is as far as the basic introduction as far as the directors is concerned. Then we move on to the number of directorship. The total number of companies that you can be a director, that is any individual can be a director. There is a big shift from 1956 to 2013. Understand this very carefully. Earlier on, I could have been a managing director in 100 private companies. Nobody would have asked me any questions. I could have been a director in 100 private companies. But look at the cap that the government has brought out, which is the maximum number of companies that a person can be a director is capped at 20. Now again, if you get on to the details of this, 20 splits into 10 plus 10, which is either you can be a director in 20 private companies, or you can choose to be a director in 10 public companies and 10 private companies. That is the change, which is great initiative as far as the government is concerned. But look at what is happening. On January 10th, SEBI comes out with a press release which says it wants to cap the number of directorship for an independent director to 5. It's just a press release. It's still not out. But look at the harmonization in laws which is not happening, which is not sinking now. So let us look at the available options. So if I have to be a director in 20 companies, my take is 5 independent directors, 5 listed companies, 5 public companies, and 10 private companies. I mean, in case, when as and when that particular thing is going to become law. So 5 plus 10. Otherwise, today as it stands, it's 10 plus 10, which is 10 public companies and 10 private companies. Now there is also a provision which is 165 subsection 2, which says company can specify a lesser number by special resolution or articles. What does it mean? It means if you are a director in my company, on my board, I can still restrict the number of directorship that you can hold in other companies through a special resolution in my company. So there are a lot of things which you need to note. This is a lot of change. The first two basic sections there was no change, but as we go along there is going to be a lot of changes as far as this particular section is concerned. So let me recap. The minimum maximum has not changed, and then the maximum has changed to 15. Then the directorship, holding of directorship. Now what has happened is it has got capped to 20. 20 is 5 according to me. When the SEBI thing comes, 5 plus 5 plus 10, or it is 10 plus 10, or 20 private companies. This is what the holding powers as far, or holding capacity as far as the director is concerned in other companies. Now the next one is 165 subsection 3. When is it applicable? Now please note, it says 1 year from commencement of the Act, which means August 29, 2014. There are two provisions here. One is a woman director, and this, which just stops with commencement of the Act. Whereas a resident director provision will throw up commencement of the Act or notification of the rules of that particular section. So, understand two different dates that you need to understand. One, 29th August is what our 2013 was born. The Act was born. So, 1 year from the date of commencement would typically take you to 29th of August 2014, when the preparedness has to start as far as this particular section is concerned. Now, what does this say? It says you choose to retain the 20 companies, which means if you are assisting a company where the promoter is director in, say, multiple companies, 20, 25, 30, whatever, the process of countdown you need to initiate today, which means you have about 8 months to do this whole process of restructuring, not the board, the person's directorship to 20. So that job has to start. Okay, now 165.4. What does this particular provision say? It says any resignation that you make is effective immediately from the date you make. And that's obvious. I mean, even otherwise, you don't have to wait for a Form 32 to be submitted, is what is the underlying thing which the 165.4 throws up. Then we have 165.5, which I am not getting into details, how the resignation has to be given and so on and so forth. And 165 subsection 6 deals with penalty. These are two provisions which I would like to skip. Next we move on to the provisions of DIN. One of the most funny provisions. As I keep analyzing the 7 sections for you, you will understand why I am referring this as funny. Section 153 to section 159 is what provisions of directors identification number is all about. 153 is great. 154 there is nothing. I'll explain to you each and every section why it is turning out to be funny. Then we have 158, which is fantastic. So out of the 7 sections, you will find 2 sections to be interesting. The rest I will just take you through why it is not all that great. 153 says apply for DIN, and the form number is 11.3. Clear. I don't think there is any big explanation required as far as 153 is concerned. 154 says central government to allot DIN within 30 days. It doesn't take more than 30 seconds to get the DIN today if you go and upload. So I don't know why it is still a copy paste from 1956. They could have as well deleted this particular section. It's all straight through. I mean, you don't have to even wait. The acknowledgement comes and it's all over. Max of 1 minute. That's all. Section 155. No duplicate application for DIN. This is very funny, huh? What we did is we were trying to figure out the DIN for some director. Say for example Vipul Chaudhary. 3 Vipul Chaudharys. Then there was one more guy with Vipul, another 2. And then we thought, okay, maybe same roof, cannot change. The father's name and the mother's name. So we did some research and found that the father is the same. Address is the same. So there exists a scenario today where there are multiple persons holding duplicate DIN. And then the rule says, if you are found to be in possession of duplicate DIN, then, like your SIM card, it can be deactivated. By whom? Nothing is said. So which means, actually it is a sin to have a duplicate DIN. But there is no provision as on date which will go ahead and deactivate this DIN. I'll come to that. The rules are, it's a fantastic rule wasted with about 1.5 pages. It's a good thing for reading, but if you want to analyze it, you will find there's a lot of loopholes. 156. DIN to be communicated to all companies within 1 month. Now, you have a provision which very clearly says, no director can be appointed. All of us know that this is a qualification, right? Or basic qualification for a person to become a director is DIN. And when you are filing a Form 32 equivalent today, 11.8 if I am right, if you are filing, then you need to attach a consent letter. That consent letter very clearly should lay out two things. One is, he is in possession of a DIN, and two, he is not disqualified under section 164. Simple. These two has to be there in the consent letter. Now where is the question of informing ROC? Another redundant provision which is just added to the number of pages in 2013. Next, section 157. Companies to furnish the DIN to ROC within 15 days. Now this is all hypothetical, okay? I mean, how? Taking into a scenario which can never happen. A scenario that a company is incorporated without a director in place. Theory. It's possible. Theory. There is a lot of sections which can throw up. Then within 15 days you need to appoint a director, and such appointment you should intimate to the ROC. That is there somewhere. But tell me which ROC will incorporate a company without the director. Another redundant provision, take it and put it in the bin. So, 54 gone, 55 gone, 56 gone, 57 gone. Out of 7 sections. So, actually you just need to know about 2 sections. Now we are entering 158. Fantastic. What does it say? DIN to be mentioned on all documents to be filed by the director. This is a great provision. It is like all the professionals like you and me putting our CP number on the bottom, which is actually, a little problematic. But let the director also put his DIN, which means he is a person who is not a Benami and is a traceable guy, which is very good as far as the initiative is concerned. So, no documents henceforth can be signed without the director putting his DIN in the, for so and so X director, and then the director identification number. Great move. So 153, 154, fantastic as far as the provision of DIN is concerned. 4 sections, forget it. And then 159. 159 deals with violations, penalty and so on and so forth. I am not getting into details because, see, understand one thing, this 2013 is very interesting. In 1956, when you were reading Companies Act, all of us used to rush to the last provision of every section to search for exemption clause. 2013, you will rush to the last clause of every section to read the penalty clause. That's the only difference between 1956 and 2013. Now let's move on to disqualification. Disqualification is 164. It is almost on par with 274 of 1956, except for a few changes which I want to tell you, which is great. Now what are these sections which has undergone change or subsections? 164 subsection 1 subclause D. There was a provision in 274 also, which was relating to moral turpitude. Now look at this. Government has quietly added, this Companies Act, you will find 2 words added there, or otherwise. Catch number 1. Moral turpitude, you should understand, is a subject which is itself subjective, which is like, something where, maybe jaywalking in the streets is a crime in abroad. But whereas in India it's okay, you can walk anywhere on the street. So simple things as this. 2. Grave offences as a sexual harassment or rape or whatever, where conviction is 6 months, not less than 6 months. To 7 years. Look at the gaps. 6 to 7, greater than 7. Now why should you remember this? If you are convicted for an offence between 6 months to 7 years, 6 years, 364 days, then you have a chance to come back on board with a gap of 5 years. You can roam around the world and come back as a new citizen, right? But the catch is, the moment the conviction is 7 years plus, then you are debarred for life. Look at this disqualification, which is very nice. And in India, if you look at 7 years, if you do some research under criminal procedure, you are almost dead. If a person is not to be located for 7 years, he is deemed to be not there. He becomes a zombie, even if he comes back. So 7 years is something where it's a life imprisonment. It's a grave offence, 7 years plus. So you are debarred to become a devil. So this is the catch as far as this particular provision is concerned, which is coming. The next one is 164, subsection 1, subclause G. This is another very nasty provision, I would say, because related party transaction, you can compound once. The same offence, if you commit it within 3 years, there is no compounding available. Right? So what does this try to convey? If there is a transaction in which you are committed an offence consecutively in 2 years, then you are disqualified. So the question that arises is, if somebody is convicted under 297 now, would it hold good for related party transaction under 188? So there is no clear-cut answer for this from my side, but let us just figure out how to, what it has to offer. So understood? So related party transaction you cannot end. Related party transaction is there almost everywhere. The moment I start talking about 149, the independent directors, you will find the only related party transaction. You can never enter into a transaction which is RT. Then the next one is a very simple one, which is 164, 1 subsection H. That is DIN. If you have not obtained a DIN, obviously you cannot. That's again not a very fair thing to put, because you cannot be appointed a director unless you don't have a DIN. So there is a question of disqualifying him. But maybe this gets connected to the other issue which I told you, the rule, which is the deactivation, or you have obtained a DIN in a fraudulent manner and so on and so forth, wrongful manner. Then government has got a right to deactivate or cancel your DIN. So then comes back to 164, read with 152.3, you are out of the boat. Then the next one, let's just move on to the appointments, which is 152. Now as far as 152 is concerned, 152 subsection 3 deals with the basic qualification for a director to be appointed, which is he is to be in the possession of a director identification number, very clear, under section, or he gets disqualified under section 164, 1 subsection H. Clear. Then you have 152 subsection 4, which is the proposed director has to give a declaration that he is not disqualified. So understand, where are we coming from? The moment you talk about a consent letter, don't stop with the consent letter. I have seen a lot of people just saying that I, so-and-so, possessing DIN, so-and-so, hereby give my consent to act as a director. Don't stop with that. You want to say, I am not disqualified. What is the difference? Onus If you take this letter, the onus is on the director. You don't take it and go out of the filing, the onus is on the certifying guy. So please don't do that. I mean, these are all requirements which are all there in the Act. So never miss out this, so that the authorities say that you should have taken care of these simple consent letters and you have not done it. So very important. Next is 152 subsection 5. Now this consent letter, I don't think there is any definitive format available, but they said 11.2, form 11.2 is what you need to obtain from the director to the company, and 11.8, which is equivalent to form 32, has to be filed with the ROC. Very simple. Next, if you are appointing an independent director, there is one more catch, which is notice to include, that is, every notice that you go ahead in a general meeting to reappoint this independent director, you need to attach what is called a statement, or include a statement that the proposed director satisfies the provisions of 149(6). Now if I start with 149(6), it has got some 6-7 subsections. We'll get into details. That says what the independent director can do, cannot do. There is an integrity check, which is like, the only way to prove an integrity check is like Lord Hanuman to rip off and then show that somebody is existing. So I don't know who will do your integrity check. Whether the director can do a self-appraisal type, self-integrity check. I mean, these are all issues which will come up. Then we have disclosure. Disclosure by directors. Every director, disclosure in the sense, this is one more procedure, which is 152 subsection 2, which says every director shall be appointed at general meetings. This is on par with what was existing in the 1956 Act. And now we move on to types. Types, the first one is, of course, woman director, if I'm right, because I wanted to. Now this woman director is what I was just telling you, that the date on which the appointment or it gets into effect, please note, it doesn't talk about notification. It says commencement of the rules. Listed company. So it's applicable to all listed companies. Within 1 year from commencement or second proviso to 149 subsection 1. Public company paid up capital 100 crores within 3 years from the commencement of second proviso. Public company which has turnover of 300 crores within 3 years from the commencement of second proviso. So these are the 3 important points that you need to remember for women directors, and I think women directors for a listed company is on priority, which is going to happen, which is just about 8 months to go, and curtains will be down. So we have to go ahead and appoint a woman director. Now, the next important type is resident director. Who is a resident director? 149 subsection 3 is what describes who a resident director is. It says, every company shall have at least one director who has stayed in India for not less than 180 days in the previous calendar year. Now here look at this, the applicability of the section. It says, commencement of the Act or notification of the relevant rules. So you have time as far as resident director is concerned. It also gives you 1 year, but after the notification of the said rules. Now, what do you think can be a catch? This I very briefly touched upon in my first session. I'll just give you 2 examples. How serious this issue on resident director is. There was a real estate company in Delhi, and there was fire. The promoters of the company disappeared on the night of the fire. Now the next day, the fire was so big in Delhi that it became a very political stuff, and then they wanted somebody. You know who got arrested? Independent director. You know why? He was resident at that point of time. Because he was the only person locally available in Delhi to be taken inside. No, I'm not here to frighten you with this concept of resident director, but be careful. Be very, very careful with this concept, because government has thought about this so well, and then they have tried to frame this. Then all of us know about this Union Carbide case. Now in Union Carbide, what happened? Overnight, it was exported. And then finally, who got into the firing range? Keshav Mahendra, who was the chairman, non-executive chairman of the company. So, Act doesn't differentiate or all this is fine. I'll still speak on 149 subsection 12 relating to immunization for at least half an hour. But when it comes to practical problems, be very careful. Now, what are the ways in which I can try and manage this resident director? Can I appoint an alternate director to somebody who is, say, typical, a multinational? They don't have anybody in India. They have two directors who are based out of US, UK, Singapore, wherever. And then what I do is, I don't appoint a director here, for whatever reasons you know best. I appoint somebody called alternate director. Now, can this alternate director fill this gap relating to resident director? Answer is yes. Be careful. The next alternative that I have is, why not I appoint an independent director? As it is, my turnover is more than say 100 crores or whatever. I need to appoint somebody, and then I look for an independent director. And there is only one director in India, which is the independent director. So does the independent director become a resident director? So these are all things which there is not much clarity, but be very careful. And the last option is, I'll tell you, which is the most common option, which I again dealt with in brief in my previous session. You are working as a finance manager of a multinational company. After this particular section is notified, you are suddenly promoted as a director. So you become a multiple personality guy, which is KMP, key managerial personnel, because you become a whole-time director there, plus a resident director. So, by just converting your employment contract into a simple 11.8 filing, which is the Form 32 filing, I can convert your status from being a simpliciter employee who was very happy in life, whatever, drawing that small remuneration, to a full-time director and a resident director of the company. So, three scenarios that I can think of which I can convert this particular provision to the advantage of my company is this. Now, when it is the other side of the forum, I will speak to you in a different manner, and I will tell you how not to accept it, how to escape from it. But from a company perspective, this is the only choice, which is three choices which are available where you can go ahead and do a resident director. The next is again 152.1, which is the old proviso, there is no change, which is on first directors. And first directors, as all of you know, is a director who is named in the articles. If the articles fails to name him, then the subscribers of the memorandum will become the first directors. There is no change. It's as is, where is basis thing. Next is retirement. That is, directors who come into the 255, 256 of the old Act is continuing to be the same, which is just 152 subsection 6 subclause A is what it is under the present Act. No change. Then you have 257 of the previous 1956, which is section 160 of the 2013 Act. All of you know brief background of this particular thing. I am just Aam Admi, and then I suddenly aspire to become the director of a listed company in the country. All I have to do is I need to prepare a A4 page letter which is I so-and-so nominate myself as the director of the company, get a proposal, seconder, attach a small 500 rupees check or whatever and then send it across to the company. Now the problems that the company used to face, a listed company, is so much that it had to circulate, it had to put all those things, provided your application is right. Now this is a big relief. In fact, about 20 years back I had written in Chartered Secretary that 500 when they introduced this is a piddly sum. The nuisance that it creates, this section, because of this was quite a bit. Now they have increased this to 1 lakh rupees. 1 lakh. Then what they have done, they have added one more, which said, poor fellow, 1 lakh is a big money, not like 500. So it is like the election deposit. So you get 25% of the votes, then you get the refund. Otherwise you lose the deposit. So simple. So an Aam Aadmi who wants to play around now has to take a chance of sending 1 lakh rupees. Instead he can subscribe and become Aam Aadmi Party, a member. That's more easy, 10 rupees. So that is 257 equivalent, which is 160. Now we have additional director, which is 260, which is 161 subsection 1 of the new act. Is there any change? No. But over a period of time, what was practiced has got inserted as one line, which is last date on which AGM should have been held. He will continue to be a director. That's all. This was the practice. It was not there very specifically under 260. They have brought it under 160. Then you have alternate director. This is another very interesting thing. So you will find that most of the slides have at least one or two changes. It's not that they have copied and pasted 1956. So there is a little amount of learning that you need to do on most of these sections. Now look at this alternate director. 313 of 1956, which is 161 subsection 2. What is the difference? Difference is, if a person was not in the state, was the previous act. Now it has become India. So the state has got replaced to India. The old act, was the state equal to India? No. We have enough and more case laws to substantiate, which is state means Karnataka. So if a person was not available for more than 3 months in Karnataka, then you could appoint an alternate director. Today, if a person is not there for more than 3 months in India, then you can go ahead and appoint an alternate director. Simple. So this is one big change, which is what has been brought out. Then proviso 1. Alternate to an independent director should always be an independent director. Perfect. Absolutely. This is what was a listing agreement. They have got it aligned with companies. Proviso 2. Tenure will expire on the date as that of original. Fair enough. Which means if the original director was to retire at the forthcoming AGM, then this man is also retire. Then advantage of reappointment available only to the original director. Which doesn't mean, it's like simple terms, cricket, you have a substitute running along with you, that's all. Just treat this guy as a runner. You are injured, you are a runner. Very simple terms, that's all. So, no benefits as far as alternate is concerned, but don't forget resident director. What can get you into trouble? Nominee director, 161 subsection 3. Nominee director, nothing much. There is a proviso which very clearly explains who this nominee director is. But what is funny is when I went through this, there is a provision 408, which was government can appoint nominee, which was exercised in Satyam case. That particular provision is missing. So this nominee, according to me, would be a nominee of an investor, a nominee of another person, of a shareholder, so on and so forth. But only thing that you should remember is, when you are uploading this form 32, today's context, form 32, there are various categories available in 32, and if you fail to press that nominee director option, then you cannot get immunization or immunized under section 149 subsection 12. 149 subsection 12, what does it say? Independent director or a director who is not a executive director or a, that means all these characters actually fall into that particular category. But you should choose that option and press that option. Otherwise, it's all evidence, right? I mean, you can't go and prove somewhere that you are a nominee director. 161 subsection 4, which deals with casual vacancy. Again, no change. It's almost the same as the 1956 Act. Section 162 deals with, again, all the directors cannot be voted together. They have to be voted individually, separate resolution for each director's sake. 163, proportional representation, no change as far as this 265 of the previous Act is concerned. Now we have a very interesting character, which is small shareholder director. Other than a popular 4-mark question in all the institute's examination, I don't think any company has come forward and appointed a person as small shareholder director. But let us see how they have complicated it further. And first of all, this provision was useless. Now look at the complications that I am trying to put forward. This person should be holding 20,000 shares. That is the minimum. That is, the person who is being nominated as a small shareholder has to hold 20,000 rupees worth of shares.
Not more than.
Not more than 20.
Face value, no? Face value.
Face value. Okay. Then 500 shareholders or 1/10 of the shareholders should come together. In fact, Aam Aadmi requires only 800 people to nominate you for an MLA seat. No, not that I'm representative of any of those, but look at this. This guy has to go to 500 houses and then say, please nominate me. Instead, as well, contest for a MLA selection. And then it also says, look at the negatives. Only once in a lifetime he or she can become a director. That's all? Shareholder. Term is only for 3 years. Not more than 2 companies. This position can also be an independent director, which means, very, very rare that you really muster so much of support and then not be the representative of the shareholder and then cross over and then become an independent director. Not a possibility, but there is a provision which is available. So these are all some of the important things that has been added as far as the small shareholder is concerned. But usage, nil. Just ignore. Now we move on to the most important character in our today's presentation, which is the independent director. One of the most powerful positions in any board, please understand, is the independent director. I mean, there is no way somebody can ridicule it, somebody can be cynical, be critic. No, forget it. I mean, those are all nice for a different forum. Now look at this person, what all he can do, what he cannot do. So what does it say? Every listed company shall have 1/3 of the total number of directors as independent directors. It says public company. Other than this, there is a category called public company whose paid-up capital is 100 crores, turnover 300 crores or debt of 200 crores. Did you know that there is one more category, which is private company? Any private company, let us wait for all those notifications later. I mean, there is all rumors that it will not happen. Any private company for which the corporate social responsibility is applicable, that is provisions related to CSR, which is at 5 crores, 500 crores, 1000 crores turnover, 5 crores of capital, 500 crores of net worth or 1000 crores of turnover, will have to constitute a CSR committee, and that CSR committee will have at least one independent director. This is what is the provision. But this beats the logic. It says only listed company and public company, whereas there is one more provision, which is 135, which says private company should also have an independent director. So let us for a moment take it that this is the full and final book which is available in front of me, and let's analyze. So there are 3 categories, which is listed company, public company and private company with this criteria, who should have an independent director. So far clear. Now what does it say? Very simple. What is the qualification for this independent director? This is what I was referring to in 149 subsection 6. They have laid down a list of what this person should possess and not possess, and what he can do and what he cannot do. First and foremost, 149.6a. Person of integrity. Very important. Who will vouch? Don't know. Every year he has to give 2 declarations. One is called the integrity test, another is called the independence test. These are all self-appraisals. I don't think there is any mechanism which has got evolved where somebody can test these 2 particular criteria. So he has to give. So, like 274-1G, let us say, if we started working on a declaration for an independent director, it was running to 2 pages. Gone are those one half a page, which is that 274-1G declaration. Now, when you are looking at a declaration for an independent director, it will run into at least 1.5 pages, which is all this. He will have to give lot of self-declaration to the board. Possess relevant experience and expertise. Now, this experience and experience, what is happening is, they have delegated it to the board. This particular provision 149.6, subsection 6a, you have to read it with 150. What does 150 say? 150 subsection 1 says, the responsibility of identifying a good independent director. Onus is on the board. Government has not taken responsibility. It's your company. You identify the person, so the onus is on the board. So, again, these are all subjective. How much is experience? I don't know. Who is illiterate? I don't know. Because if you take audit committee, it just says to read financial statements. Can't a commerce graduate read a financial statement? He can. So, would I still look for a CA? I don't know. So, these are all some grey areas which has been left open, where you can pick and choose. Like finance, marketing, then they have given HR. There's so many opportunities which has been thrown open, which I'll come to, which is on schedule 4. On the courts, they have very clearly said, these are all the qualifications which you can use to identify an independent director. Next, B. Such a person should not be. Now this should not be. The exception, instead of running through all this, just ensure that you meet a person whom you don't know. You have never met that person, pick him up. Because the analysis throws up so much, it says, promoter of a company, he should not be or was a promoter, is a relative who is connected, then there is a KMP related. There is so much of minus that, he should not have passed through your system at all. So, go and hunt for an independent director who is in no way connected as far as the company's present or past was. Simple exercise. You don't have to really go through each one of these and then put a chart and then keep negating all these things. Then there is something called pecuniary. Now look at this. Pecuniary is something which is consisting of or relating to money, requiring payment of money. So, underlying thing is very simple. So, this person who is identified should have passed through the system and should have generated some money in the process. That's all. Simple test. So, if somebody was engaged with your company not for cash or otherwise, then he is outside the purview of this whole thing. Simple. Then, such a person should have pecuniary relationship with, again, company, holding, subsidiary, associate, promoters. They've covered everything. Then, through the relatives, any transaction with company, holding, subsidiary, associate, promoters, if you just do up this chart and see, everybody is covered as far as the particular appointee is concerned if he is going through the process. Very simple. If you are identifying a person and his daughter is working in your company for a salary, falls under this category, because pecuniary is money. Money is any amount which is directly or indirectly or benefited, so it will still fall under the category. So even that you need to be careful. Then again, I am not getting into too much of detail because 149.6EI talks about KMPs, employees, holding subsidiary. I mean, so let's just slowly move out of this thing. Only one important point which I want to highlight there is 149.6E4, which talks about non-profit organization, which is say for example, your company was into CSR activity and then your company was contributing to this activity through a trust or an NPO. In that trust, this person was the CEO. And the checklist is very simple. If 25% of the contribution has passed through this of the trust, then that person cannot be operated. So, simple terms, money related, any person who has crossed the system, disqualified. That's it. So, don't get into further details. 149.6F. Possess such qualification as may be prescribed. Now, this is what I was just telling. This has to be read with B. Finance, law, management, administration, sales, marketing, research, corporate governance. I don't know what is the qualification related to corporate governance. Corporate governance is just a movement. Okay, I mean there is no qualification for a corporate governance. And technical operations, other disciplines related to the company's business. These are some of the things which are prescribed. Then what is the difference between this clause 49 and clause 149, which is section 149 to clause 49? There is still a disconnect between these two legislations. Here it says, section 149 says 1/3 of the requirement for an independent director. There it says 1/2. So all this has to get into a sync mode at a later date. And then there it uses, clause 49 uses material pecuniary interest. Company law says pecuniary interest. So these are some of the things. There it says, nominee director is independent. How can a nominee director be independent? I'll just give you a very simple example. A company in which there is an investment by a private equity guy. Okay, private equity. He has to nominate somebody. Now this private equity cannot even nominate somebody who is working in his advisory company. Why? Because directly or indirectly there is a carry or a bonus for this character who is going to come and sit on your board. So he is also not an independent director. So how can you say nominee director can be independent director? No. So that's a huge disconnect because, understand, so this character called nominee director is a representative of a fund. No. So you can pick an outsider who is an indirect nominee and then come on board. So no letters, nothing, he just comes on board straight as a independent director. So these are some of the disconnects between clause 49 and section 149 which will get rectified over, shortly SEBI is going to bring out a major change as far as clause 49 is concerned. So hopefully let's see if there is a change coming up. 149.7. Now what does it say? Independent director should give a declaration. Disqualification means criteria of independence. This is what I said. So self-declaration. When first meeting after his appointment and first board meeting in Q1 of every financial year. So understand this 24AA which was there, which is annual disclosure. You have to keep adding lot of points relating to lot of these disclosures. So 2 disclosures, one immediately after the meeting, first meeting, and one annual disclosure. Add to your annual disclosure. Then issues 149.8, which is abide or follow the code of conduct or code for independent directors, which is listed out in schedule 4. So look at the issues that you are likely to face as an independent director, in the sense administrative issues. Forget strategies, etc., inside the boardroom, that's a bigger subject. So while you enter the boardroom itself, only paperwork. And as a director, please be advised, you can never have a paperless office. Why? Because evidence very clearly says, unless and until you show me paper, I will not trust. Unlike the Satyam case, please don't show copies of the whatever documents. You need to have originals. So when you go to a court, there is a case. You need to have a Form 32. You need to have a receipt. You need to have all these codes, things which are signed off before you get on to the board as an independent director. Clear? Now we are moving to the most important one, which is there are 8 parts to Schedule 4. Most voluminous 2 schedules other than the depreciation schedule. Schedule 4 and Schedule 5. Both. Chapter 11, Chapter 13. Schedule 4 deals with the independent director. Schedule 5 deals with the managerial remuneration, which was our Schedule 13. Now what does this say? Schedule 4, Part 1. Very honestly, I can't get into each and every detail of this beautiful document. Please go through. Wherever it requires my prompting, I will just throw up some example and keep moving. Uphold ethical standards and probity. What does this mean? I'll just give you a very simple example. There was a company in Mumbai where the managing director was caught. Caught for whatever income tax related, bribe, paying some bribe. Now, tell me, the independent director who was sitting on board, did he have knowledge about the fact that money was exchanged? Or did he know about this only after reading the next day's newspaper over a coffee? There may not be answers to too many of these questions, okay? But again, that's what I'm saying. So, these are all things where when you go to prove. Now, very simple. The question is very simple. Previous day evening when the managing director was arrested, did he know about the arrest or not? Or did he know, like you and me when we were reading one of the best business dailies, is when the managing director was arrested. So the very first point itself there is a failure. Uphold ethical standard. So, who failed in upholding ethical standard? Was it the independent director or was it the managing director? Simple. Like this I have a number of cases which I can throw up. So, you don't know what went wrong, right? Number 2, act objectively while exercising his duties. Now, what is this acting objectively? Very simple. Whenever an independent director is asked to express, there has to be a dissent. When he has expressed his dissent, it has to be recorded. When it is recorded, it has to be circulated. When it is circulated, it has to be minuted. If it is minuted, it has to be signed. And don't keep quiet. After the signature is over, take that copy and put it in your file. This is the process of immunization. Not that you got a 2-pager draft for your review and you dissented, commented, and then you ignored the fact that this was not recorded in the board minutes. So much of that. Just because you sign off on a code doesn't mean that you have to keep quiet. So the next stage is this is the process. Why am I stressing so much on this board process? Because when you come along with me on 149 subsection 12, it very clearly says to prove that you are innocent or to prove that you are not negligent, you should have communicated all this through a board process. So simple, dissent to be recorded to be circulated to be minuted to be signed, and that copy has to get into your personal box file. Hard copy, no soft copies. Hard copy. So this is what is the board process. This is how serious issues like this are. Now, let us see next one, responsibilities. Now what is this responsibility? Just like that there is a nice beautiful thing which has been put up, right? First of all, to know whether you are signing off on that document, how is your role defined? Did the company give you an appointment order when you were appointed as an independent director? Was your scope clearly laid out in that particular document? Otherwise, How can you hold me responsible for something when there is no scope or a role which is defined? So like this, if I go on and on and on, it would take at least full day on this session. That much is the depth as far as this particular schedule 4 is concerned. Now there is the fourth point, devote time. How much of time? Who decides the time? Now as it is, if SEBI is going to say that you are going to go on board for 5 companies, imagine gentlemen, 5, ladies and gentlemen, 5 into 7, 35 days is gone. I'm just giving you simple math, which is per quarter 35 days of your time is gone. Minimum, I'm just talking about minimum. So, how much of time? How much is the right number? Whether 5 is correct, 3 is correct, 7 is correct, it all depends on the personal appetite. How much can you take? So, very clearly all this has to be defined. Then I'll just touch upon one point and then try to go on, which is what it tries to say is no vulgar remuneration. What is this vulgar remuneration? This I am not using. This is Salman Khurshid, our minister, used about 3 years back in a Business Daily headline. And he said, there is too much of vulgar remuneration which is being paid. Understand? Very clear. Now when I come to the topic on remuneration, I will highlight on this. Today the only remuneration that you can get as an independent director is sitting fish. For a loss making company. For a profit making company, you have additional 1% of the net profit that you can ask as fees. So this is what is the cap. No stock options, which is again coming in the next few slides. So this is what is your requirement. So for this, what is it that you are going to pay back, or what is it that you are going to contribute back to the company? Now here again I would give you a simple example. Now after paying this, you are made the chairman of a remuneration committee. And you have to approve/disapprove the remuneration of the CEO. This is a dilemma. If you don't approve, a problem with you as far as your survival is concerned. You approve, you are answerable to statutory agencies, which is the reporting part. 197 subsection 12, which I was just telling you. Fantastic. That's a UK-based initiative which the government has brought in, which is reporting on the remuneration in the annual report of the company. And who is the chairman of the remuneration committee? Is you. So think, these are all only eye-openers, not something to discourage you from becoming an independent director or somebody to be, to being an independent director. That is what 8 says, losing independence. Read with section 149 subsection 7. So approving excess remuneration to CEO, point number 7, which is the example I gave you. Now let's just move on to part B, which deals with roles and functions. Now this is another big game. They have laid down all this. Now take Satyam. There is a merger decision which came up in the first point, which came in the board meeting. If it had gone through, Raju would have been gone, like any other entrepreneur. It did not go through. It flopped. And along with him, he made the entire team sink, which is all the independent directors. So what do we do with this? So these are some of the huge challenges which are there, roles and functions. Now how much to decide, what to decide. Now I don't want to name the company, we go to point number 7. Again on the vulgar remuneration. Understand the independent directors are such a strong team that they sacked the CEO of a IT listed company because he asked for exorbitant salary. Now how did it happen? Even though that fellow was a promoter director and was holding minority shares, the independent directors, who are 3 or 4 of them, teamed up and said no to a business decision which was relating to from a 1 crore salary to a 4 crore salary based on performance or whatever it is. They threw him out. So it is possible. Provided it's defined. See, everything has to be in black and white. People think that, oh my God, I just enter and then I go, I attend 4 meetings, I am independent. No. It has to be in black and white, it has to be defined, it has to be specific. Then these powers actually get derived because of this document which is called Schedule 4. Then we have duties. Now look at the first point. That itself is not happening. What is that? Continuing education. What will a 65-year-old independent director know more than this? That is the general feedback that I get. Unfortunately, people don't understand that till the last day you are still a learner. Why I am telling you this? Very simple. 134 subsection 5 subclause F, which deals with director's report. The entire board has to give an undertaking that the company has complied with all applicable laws. Game over. Read with 166 subsection 3. Or even if one small mistake, as far as the company is concerned, it's a collective board. Please understand, director's report is not signed by order of the board. It's always signed as for and on behalf of the board. Which means you authorize two people to go and sign something on behalf of us. It's a collective decision. So, unless and until you have some continuing education where there is budget for training directors, so on and so forth, it's not going to work. Good for most of us who are into this profession where, opinions and interpretations and a lot of things are there, but imagine the other side. If you are going to sit on boards, what is going to happen? Then, there's something like, attend all the general meeting, unless sick or with multiple companies. That's not fair. Now what it tries to say is, if you are an independent director and there is an annual general meeting where two companies are clashing, where you are the chairman of the audit committee of both the companies. But this is again not done. You know why? Very simple. I am the chairman of an audit committee today and my board is meeting today to decide a date. I can always find out from the other company when the annual general meeting is. So this escape route is not available according to me, which is not fair, which is not done. Which is, if there are multiple meetings, then he is exempt from attending one of the meetings. No, but there is a provision available there. Then dissent to be recorded. Now look at this, point number 6. Now I'll give you a very simple example. Now you are the finance heads of some of the companies. Now I'll tell you a practical thing which happened about 15 years back. There was an ESI notice which came to the company. Typical of an admin guy or a finance guy, it's after all a ESI notice. Understand? Right? It's after all a ESI notice. I don't think I need to inform the board. Look at the blunder which cost that particular CFO the job. Within 1 month, that issue was not resolved, and those days, a fine of 1 crore was slapped on the company. Now this man became tense and said, oh my God, this is the value of penalty that these guys are coming up. I will place it to the board. What was the first question? When did this actually happen? It's about 1.5 months back. We thought we can manage. Couldn't manage. It's past. It's gone. I mean, who will help you? Now, was it your company? Were you the promoter of the company? Were you running the company? No. All that you have to do is to go and hand over this notice inside the boardroom and say, please, this is a notice which I have received, please resolve. Forget what machinery the company puts in. But they could have resolved it. Duties. Pollution, last one. Look at this. There are two instances which I will let you know. One, there is a ONGC gas leak. The director sitting in the boardroom, can he get into 20,000 leaks below the sea level and see where the leak is? No. Or in Union Carbide. Gas went out into the system. Tell me, as an independent director, if I have to read that 166 carefully, it says the director will be responsible. The duty of a director is to ensure that he safeguards the interest of the stakeholders vis-a-vis the environment, the employee, etc., etc., etc. Other than the director, he has to safeguard the interest of everybody else. That huge, that particular provision related to 166 is. So you need to have a machinery, you need to have information systems which will help you to execute what is put in section 166 or in the schedule 4. But these are all documents. 166 is a section, whereas schedule 4 is an annexure which is part of the act which lays down certain things for better governance. Then there are enough and more sitting out there which I may not be able to spend too much of time. 9 is conflict of interest, 10 is whistleblower, 11 is again things like sexual harassment case which some of the directors had got involved, all those things are there. So, and the last one of course is relating to insider trading. So these are all some of the important things which are to be ethical, and these are duties which directors have to abide by. Now let's just move on to part 4, which is manner of appointment. Now as far as the manner of appointment is concerned, I am not getting into too much of details because we have figured out what it is, which is rule 11.3 says what is the qualification. Read with 149 subsection 6 says what is the qualification that the director needs to have. Next, shareholders consent. Clear. Read with 151. Now, this is what I was just telling you. Section 150 subsection 1 very clearly says the onus is on the board. So, identify somebody who is the right person. Then, 4 is the best clause which defines roles, and 5 is relating to terms and conditions of appointment which can be inspected by members. The others are okay, but manner of appointment, first 4 points very important, out of which 4th point the best. Next is 5, which deals with reappointment. Again, read with this has to be read with clause or part 8, which deals with the evaluation mechanism. So, understand one simple thing: unless and until you are evaluated and you are found to be the right person to be reappointed, you will not be reappointed. So, what is the mechanism? Very simple: either take his resignation or face him off in the general meeting. So and so was eligible to be reappointed, has chosen to not to be re-elected. That's all. So if you find these 2 cases, that means that independent director has not performed in the company and is just phased off from the company. Very simple mechanism of moving a director out of your company. Resignation or removal, again, replacement has to be done within 180 days. This is again in sync with what SEBI is. SEBI also requires an independent director to be replaced within 180 days. Then, part 7, which deals with separate meetings. Separate meetings for independent directors, all independent directors to be present, purpose, review performance of non-independent directors, chairman and flow of information. So these are some of the things which has been listed on how to go about doing a separate meeting for the independent directors. Then part 8 is relating to evaluation mechanism. Again, no specific evaluation mechanism is done except that a funny thing that except the director who is to be evaluated, the others will sit and evaluate the performance of the independent director. So that's about it as far as this particular schedule 4 is concerned. Now we move on to 149.9 relating to remuneration. I'll club it along with schedule 13. Now we move on to the tenure. Tenure is 149 subsection 10, which says 5 years is what independent director can be appointed, and he can be appointed in an annual general meeting. And 149.11 says not more than 2 consecutive terms, and cooling period is 3 years. And it also adds saying that during these 3 years he will have no connection, or he will not have any interaction with the company, so that it's all at arm's length and he is not interfering in the company's business. So 5, 2 terms and cool off period of 3 years. Next is 149 subsection 13, which deals with provision of retirement by rotation. Not applicable to an independent director. He is outside the this character and the nominee directors, both these characters are not liable to retire by rotation, along with the small shareholders. Manner and selection of independent director. Now this is what I said, another very important provision, which is 150 subsection 1. This has got 4 parts, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll just take you through how beautifully it is done, and then how fearful it is when you get and go to read the in-depth of what is mentioned. Now what does it say? 150 subsection 1 has to be read with rule 11.4, and it says selection. Now what it says is very simple. Government doesn't want to take responsibility. Point number 1. Government says it's not anybody, it is any body, but it looks like it's anybody. Any body institute or association will be given the responsibility of holding on to this baby called data bank. What is this data bank? Data bank should have, understand very clearly, this data bank, one of them till today nobody has been identified, nothing is happening, but someday, say Institute of Chartered Accountants of India has given this beautiful opportunity, then it says, if I have to become an independent director, I have to put on my consent in a form which is 11.2 or something and send it across to the institute. Institute will in turn ask me for certain particulars. I found when I went through that list, only two things are missing. The most important today password is mother's maiden name. That is not there. And the PIN number. Other than these two, you have to give everything to the... How many of you will go and open up your... it's like treasure box opening up and saying, please don't loot me. Look at this, PAN, in, when you were born, when you were... So if some person has to do a data verification from a call center, I just have to take a printout and read out everything, it will match. So please be careful. This is not what was actually intended and how it should have gone. They should have had a lot of passwords, restrictions, and then you move on to check. They say that I can collect a charge from you to put your name on the data bank, and if somebody wants to access the record, they will pay you to take records. This is not done. It is not heading anywhere. So basically a quick overview of where we are heading to. So this is what it is. Then number 2, 150 subsection 2 says process, which is appointment of the independent director in the general meeting and notice should have explanatory statement. 153 deals with registering. Now what is this registering? Registering is very simple, as I told you. I have to shoot out, it is 11.4, form 11.4, no, rule 11.4 and form number 11.1 is where I have to give the consent and say please put my name. So there are about 23 points listed out, and if you fill it up, then what will happen is you will go and sit in a data bank. Then what will happen? Government will give a disclaimer saying that even though you have chosen a person from this data bank, we are not responsible. So it's all your problem. I am just creating a space somewhere for you to look up who the independent director is. Then data from the bank on website can be publicly accessed, searchable on a parameter in 11.4.2. There is no such selection. So all this summing up, this 15.1, 2, 3, 4 looks to me to be a employment exchange reporting. All those who do not have a job, please register with the employment exchange. Looks like these guys have put it there. Now, those of you who are looking out for an independent director, trust me, just look to your left, look to your right. No, you have probable independent directors sitting next to you, I'm just saying. So, don't struggle. Okay, these are all very funny provisions which is there. As I told you, 150, 154, 154, all these are funny. But it is there, so I don't think it will become law. And I don't think government can say, you can pick up an independent director only from this data bank and from nowhere else. Immediately there will be a stay. So next is most important duties of director. This is what I said, which is 166. Now this 166 again, let me just get into details on 166.3 and 166.2. Now one is very simple. That is, you are supposed to do only what is there in the memorandum and articles that everybody knows. You can't do anything beyond what is there in chartered documents of the company. The second one, look at this. Act in good faith and promote benefit of members, best interest of employees, protection of environment. Which is what I said, we have covered everybody other than the person. Which means you can't earn. I'll give you one more simple example. There is Cadbury chocolates. And one of my known person is a director in that company, and then it so happened that in Muzaffarpur there was one chocolate which did not have the date of expiry. Look at this. Immediately you have got a show cause notice, followed by warrants, followed by a lifelong battle which he is fighting for the last 15-20 years to the best of my knowledge. Nothing is resolved. So that is the powers. One batch by mistake was not printed. Now you as an independent director, how will you even know whether that batch there was a printing error, mistake, quality check, whatever. Somewhere something has gone wrong. So in every prospectus in which he is becoming a director, he has to mention that particular case and then life goes on. So that difficult it is when you come to the micromanaging of 166. Now look at 3. Director to exercise his duties with independent judgment after doing proper due diligence. Now what it simply put it says is, suppose as a director you are a chartered accountant and there is a decision relating to some IT related or say manufacturing, pharma related. You are not competent to go on a judgment on that particular item of the agenda. All that it says is, don't worry. Engage a consultant in that particular area, take an opinion, and then go and represent yourself in the board. That is due diligence. So, when you have a problem, like, say for example, Satya merger. Now, suppose somebody says that I was a techie and I did not understand what the merger is, he could have taken a third party assistance, gone ahead and represented. That means you have conducted a due diligence before you went and committed on a particular issue. That is due diligence. Now, if you fail to do that, you don't have a paper to support you, nobody can help you. Next, avoid situations of conflict of interest. Now, this is what it is, very simple, I'll just put it across. Now, you are an independent director in a company, IT company. IT company is going in for a expansion. They are taking another building next to whatever the building is and they want to do the entire interiors. Now, your relative or your son, daughter, whatever is into architecture. You know that there is a beautiful opportunity of about 25 crores waiting to be grabbed. So, that is what is called conflict of interest. You raise your hand and say, please give me the contract, please award the contract to me. It's all over. Okay. Then avoid any undue gain to himself or his relative. Same thing, continue. So you kept quiet, you took the contract and then you generated lot of income arising out of that. You failed in your duties. So these are some of the things that you should look up and most important the penalty clause. For any violation, 1 to 5 lakhs is the penalty. Now let's move on to vacation of office. Vacation of office again very simple, 283 of the old act, almost the same as far as 167 is concerned, except for understand that 3 board meetings consecutive if you are not there in the, you are not attended, under 1956 you would have automatically vacated your office. In the new act it just says 1 physical presence in a calendar year. 12 months, it uses the word 12 months. Okay, then we move on to removal of directors. Removal of directors is section 284 of the old act. Now if you look at it, there are some changes. It's not that there is no change. What has happened is most of the clauses are retained except for the notice which you have to communicate to the shareholders. This is only a small change as far as 284 is concerned. There is nothing big. Then we move on to 149 subsection 12, which is the most important provision which you need to know. And what I have done is I have split it into 3 parts, which is the director, if he has committed an act with his knowledge, understand knowledge, where does knowledge come? Knowledge comes out of a board process, a board agenda, a board minutes. Connived, that is another word which they have used, which means you have not dissented and you have said yes to a particular proposition, which means you intentionally you did not want to be part of that, but say for example you kept quiet in a boardroom. So what happened? You did not dissent. You did not raise your hands and said, I give my assent. You kept quiet. Board passed the resolution. Are you party to that issue or not? Yes. So what the government wants from this legislation is very clear. that word of dissent, the voice of dissent, has to be expressed, has to be recorded, and only then you can escape under the provisions of 149 subsection 12. And for evidence purpose, you need to prove. It's a lovely provision, but provided as a director, you ensure that the safeguarding mechanism you have used. Yeah, not acted diligently, I'm not getting into too much of details. Now, punishment. Now, what is the beauty about this particular chapter? Chapter started with 149 and ended with 171. Now, there are only 4 or 5 sections which had the real-time penalty clause. And if you heaved a sigh of relief saying that, oh my God, there are certain sections where there is no punishment. Now look at this. 172 covers punishment for the entire chapter. That is, wherever it is silent, the statutory authorities can invoke the provisions of 172. So this is what you get to be an independent director. Great. So basically you need to get into so much of details that you slip up on something. There is one section which catches you in the end, which is 172, which talks about penal provision. If not covered, it is 50,000 to 5 lakhs. So it is more or less the same as any of the other sections. Now let's move on to resignation. Resignation is another beauty as far as this particular 2013 is concerned. All this while there were problems that a director who is not interested, wanted to jump out of the sinking ship, was not allowed to jump, and then the chairman was not letting him go, and then he was forcibly retained in the company. He had to wriggle out, he did not know how to get out of the company. He has thrown the letter at the chairman's face, under his feet, over his feet. No. Now what does 2013 say? Very simple. Within 30 days, if the company has not reacted, please go ahead and file your resignation. There's a small catch here. What does it say? Read the thing very carefully. It says, first resignation letter can be worded like this. Due to personal reasons, comma, I submit my resignation as a director of the company. Then that is attached along with the form 32 and you have said goodbye and you can go. Now suppose that letter is not acted upon, read the next paragraph. It says, when you are filing with the ROC, you have to give the reason why you want to resign. I did not like the face of the chairman, the AC was not fitting in the boardroom, whatever. So you can choose to pick up your reason, but you have to understand two different forms. 11.8, when you are doing a suo motu filing, it's a different form. So when you are doing a suo motu filing, you have to give out the reasons why you are exiting from the company. That is the big difference, but otherwise it's a fantastic provision which goes ahead. But we also have to wait and see whether your own DSC can be affixed to your form, or you have a friend in the form of a practicing CA, CS, CWA with whom you can, I wouldn't say connive, with whom you can join and then get this act together to get your resignation out. That's still not very clear, but have to wait and watch. But a great provision as far as directors is concerned. Now registers. Registers again 170, there is nothing, it is just 303, 305, 307 of the 1956 Act, which has got clubbed into one particular provision with just two parts, and then more or less all the provisions which were there has been copied, pasted, except that one addition of director's identification number is a new thing if you really compare these two legislations, otherwise almost all are same. Next, members' right to inspect. Yes, members have got right. 1956 also they had a right, this also they have given a right. Now let's just move on quickly to the chapter 13, which I think I'm bang on the timing. So, what is it? I mean, schedule 13, schedule 5. Other than that, you have 10 sections, out of which the most important section is 197, which is the charging section. All the subsections in 197 is a beauty of sorts. But let me just say what is the difference, the big difference between 1956 and 2013. understand very simple things. One, the best thing to happen is sitting fees can be paid even to a executive director. 1956 did not allow you to pay remuneration to a executive. Number two, the percentages as far as 1956 was concerned, which is 5, 6, 10, 11, 1, 3. Sorry, what is this? 5% for a single director, 5 plus 1% commission for the company. 1% is outside director. Then you move on, more than one director, 10%, overall 11%. Clear? And if you are paying only commission, 3%. If you are paying commission along with remuneration to others, it is 1%. So these are the 6 numbers which are available as far as managerial remuneration is concerned, which is intact. No change. So please don't worry about this number game, which is section 198, right away 269 of the old act, which is 197 of the present act. Next is reimbursement of expense allowed. Now one more beauty which has come into the provision is insurance. See, what is happening to this? If you have to take insurance for a director, it's outside the purview of the calculation. So what all has happened? Sitting fees earlier on 309 subsection 5 was part of the remuneration, now it is outside the calculation of the remuneration, which means you can pay as much in the sense is the ceiling, 1 lakh is the ceiling as far as sitting fees is concerned, but you can pay it to all directors and it doesn't fall under the purview of remuneration. That's a beautiful thing. Number 2, pay sitting fees to all of them. Number 3, the other good change which has come in is ESOPs, no for independent directors. I mean, why I am saying good is basically the earlier thing was yes, but again this is a small controversy between SEBI and company law, where SEBI is silent on giving stock options to independent directors, whereas company law is very clearly, specifically brought out under that section 149 that independent directors will not be entitled for stock options. Clear? So this being the overview, let me just take you through this particular chapter. And very easy to remember because earlier on it was Schedule 13, now it has become Chapter 13. I mean, the very easy correlation between these two numbers. So what does it say? Basically, as far as the managing director and whole-time director is concerned, you should also understand one thing. I did not tell you when the overall numbers were there. Now what the overall means that 20. Now there what it says is whole-time director can hold additional 2 companies as independent director, which is the starting 152, where I just started off saying that this is what is the section. But understand, the KMP, which is 203, which is coming up, does not allow a whole-time director to be a director in any other company other than its subsidiaries. Again, inside the act itself, there is a small disconnect between the section which allows a whole-time director to be on 2 boards as independent director vis-a-vis KMP, which does not allow the whole-time director to be a director in any other company. So there is a disconnect. I will come to that a little later because I was there on managing director. The next one is the managing director. Now earlier on managing director, any number of companies. Now all this is come down. Now what is the important changes? Now the important change is age limit 21 to 70. What does it mean? Earlier it was 18 to 70. Now in line with the marriageable age, they have just tuned it to 21. What happens to these guys between 18 and 21? And just to throw on, less than 18, can I appoint a director? Right?
Contract.
Yeah, that is one. Number 2 is, if you really look at it, you cannot apply for it. That direct identification number itself is not allowing you to get in, which means it's a no entry right from the time you. So it could have happened prior to 2006, but no longer. So understand that is the criteria why a minor cannot. One, he is not competent to contract. Number two, he cannot obtain DIN. Because he cannot obtain DIN, he cannot be a director. Clear on that 18. Now this 21 to 70 is what is the limit which has been brought in as far as the managing director is concerned. Next is on the overall limit. Now as far as the remuneration, I just gave you a brief overview, which is section 197 subsection 1, which is the 5%, 10%, so on and so forth. Now what is very important, which I wanted to draw your attention to, is 197 subsection 30, which is premium paid on director liability insurance will be treated as remuneration only if KMP is found guilty. For you to quickly catch up, it is like a no accident claim bonus. So first year if you are not found guilty, then that is true. So year on year is what you will have to take on this premium as far as remuneration is concerned. No claim. Next is 197 subsection 14, which is whole-time director or managing director may receive commission from group companies subject to disclosure of the same. Now here again please understand, I can take remuneration from here, I can take commission from there, but overall ceiling I still uncapped. It is not that I have different numbers same as what was there, but now it allows you to even take commission from group companies. So overall consolidation is still the same. Next is remuneration payable to director other than managing director, whole-time director, 1% of the net profit, 3% of the net profit if there is nothing, which I have just told you, but the overall ceiling continues to be at 11%. Next, sitting fees is what I was just referring to, 197 subsection 5. Maximum of 1 lakh. Sitting fees to be paid to directors for attending the board meeting of any other meeting also. So these are all ideas when you advise management. So you really don't have to be dependent on remuneration in the real sense. Can I have 12 board meetings in a year? The amount of sitting fees shall not be included in the overall limit of 11%. So understand, don't be sad, feel bad that your company is not making profits. You don't have to worry about it. Next, first proviso to 197.1. CG may authorize remuneration of excess of 11%. Then 197 subsection 12. Listed companies to disclose the ratio of remuneration to each director to the median employee. Now, this is the toughest one. The chairman of one of the largest IT companies had already mentioned about this few years back, which is the gap between the highest paid employee and the, please don't get onto peons, okay, or office works. Just get onto the same work, the peer level. The gap cannot be more than 20 times. Which is, let me tell you again, not to name the company, one of the IT companies paying 10 crore salary to the CEO. Which means, the guy who is working at say scale 1 or whatever, his salary and this 10 crores, there cannot be gap of 20 times. Now all these are issues which is going to get reflected in the annual reports. Which means understand, HR guy also plays a very important role today. If you are looking at an independent director with an HR background, now imagine this guy is in charge of compensation committee, structuring of salaries, reporting. There's so much that somebody can do even from HR background. So where did this come from? UK. They have for the last, number of years, a separate report called Remuneration Committee, which is around 2 solid pages, which will give you the entire structure of the company. It's like another corporate governance report, a part of the annual report. Then 197 subsection 15 is dealing with penalty again. Understand only two numbers relating to penalty, whether you are a chartered accountant, professional, company secretary, whatever. It starts with 1 lakh and ends with 5 lakhs. There is no other penalty I have seen anywhere. All these thousands, hundreds and all that is gone. Okay. So straight away 1 lakh it starts and ends with 5 lakhs in line with whatever inflation is as far as the country is concerned. So they are structured it well. Then 197 3, which deals with in case of absence of profits. Now there is a slab which is available, which of course you can go through, which is dealing with what is the procedure, how much can you pay if your net worth is so and so. The next is, now this is interesting. What was part A of Schedule 13, where it threw up 16 acts. This is a beautiful thing. 16 acts in the previous act, whereas, or sorry, 15 acts. This 16 acts where MD is not committed. Again, please understand all the slabs and all continue to be the same. But the exclusion is company law. Very surprising. If you read that, I think the exclusion is company law. Next is, earlier on it was 25 to 70, now they have reduced it to 21 to 70. There were 6 points, basically 6 points, which is sort of a disqualification to become a managing director, which is like if you are not a resident of the country, then if your age limit was one criteria, then there was some acts where you have to fall under, and then there was also one more point B, which dealt with Kofaposa, where it said if you were detained even for a day under that act, you were disqualified. Now I just brought up a small schedule for you to go through. This is what it is. And these are the differences between what was available in Schedule 30 and what is available under Schedule 5. Next is calculation of profit. Calculation of profit is 198 of this section, which was 349 of 1956, no change. Now we move on to the most important, we have just 3 more to go, and I'll just try to cover it, which is Section 203 dealing with KMP, which is key managerial person. Again, I am not getting into details because last two sessions, I think I have not been very kind to you, and I have been emphasizing on only 2 sections, which is please read 2 subsection 60 subclause 4 and 2 subsection 60 subclause 5, which is dealing with who an officer is and what an officer in default is. So look at this. Who is a KMP? Now KMP is very clearly defined. Now this again, please read with those 2 sections, which is defined under the definition clause, and then draw a comparison. The only thing you will find a difference is the whole-time director, which is missing and which is there in the officer in default section. So managing director, CEO, company secretary, CFO. This is how the breakup is as far as the KMP is concerned. And we just thrown up a small combination also for you, which is chairman plus managing director is not a possibility. Chairman plus CEO is not a possibility. Okay, so these are 2 things which you cannot do. And then KMP cannot hold office in 2 companies except subsidiaries. This is what I said. A whole-time director, which is there here, which is not there in that officer in default thing, which is this person cannot hold position in more than 2 companies. This is a contravention which I said, contradiction which I said, which is happening in the act.
All KMP has to be separate persons.
Separate persons. And KMP is only for companies which make profits. So obviously you will have money to pay them. So please don't deprive that position. So then section 203(4), if office of KMP is vacated, it shall be filled within 6 months. Again, this is in line with what SEBI has, what independent directors and so on and so forth. So you cannot go beyond 6 months as far as the contravention is concerned on appointment of KMP, like CFO leave, CS leave, CLO, whatever. You cannot. And I have also dealt in detail on the definition on CEO, CFO and relating to KMP in my previous session. So CEO, please understand, CEO can be a person who need not be a director. It's a different different game altogether. So you will have a chairman, you will have a CEO, but you will find that the chairman is on board, CEO is not on board. So you will have multiple characters in the company who may not be on the board. So CFO, please understand, CFO definition very clearly says he is not an officer. That means he is not on board. But the moment, as I told you, for the purpose of resident director, some company falls in love with you and says, I nominate you as the director of the company, you automatically fall into the slab of officer in default, director, club with, whatever. So you have multiple roles to perform under KMP itself. Then secretarial audit. Now secretarial audit is a big subject which is emerging, which is section 204, but predominantly the word itself says you are not interested to a great extent because it's a secretarial audit report, so it's more to do with company secretaries. But as chartered accountants, please understand now where do I come from. All listed companies, it's compulsory, which means you are part of a system, a CFO or whatever who is heading system in a listed company. Most important, and if I throw up the laws that a person has to cover, now personally what I feel is, please appoint the company secretary and give him this job. Not that I'm marketing my profession. You know why? It's an immunization. See, what it says, 205, if you go to 205 and 203, once you get these two reports and the company secretary in place, then these are the two things which is going to protect you with section 134 subsection 5 subclause F, which actually has put the onus on a director to ensure compliance of all laws. Now with this particular report, the last line, I don't know if the whole list is there. Okay, the list is not there. The last line of this particular reporting says, and such other laws applicable to the company. Which means it's a bigger headache for the CS to go and look for which are all the applicable laws than the board sitting there. So as a proactive measure, get him to do the next year's audit this year. So that the immunization is there for the assessment year, not the financial year, if I'm right, or the other way. So just get this done. So this is applicable for listed companies and for public companies. So the limits I have just laid out there. That is every listed company and a company belonging to other class, that particular classes, paid up share capital of 100 crores. So if you have a paid up capital of 100 crores, you first need a woman director who will bring a lot of discipline. There's so many women. So there's a lot of discipline into your board. Then you need a company secretary who will issue a secretarial audit report which will immunize the board to a great extent. So two people who are going to be instrumental in ensuring that you have discipline and decorum and immunization are these two characters who will come in for every company which is in excess of 100 crores of capital. And now let me move on to the last but one section of this chapter, which is functions of a company secretary, which is section 205. Now here what I want you to focus is only one thing, which is A. 205 subsection 1 subclause A. To report to the board about compliance with the provisions of this act, rules made thereunder, other laws applicable to the company. Which means, if there is a person sitting on your company as a CS, first onus, which is KMP, again if you look at the KMP, it goes in the reverse. First the CS, then the CFO, then the CEO. On compliance related, no? If there is something bigger happening, then these guys are not responsible. But from a compliance perspective, you just turn the table of KMP, and that is what will happen if you have a full-time company secretary. So this brings me to the close of these two chapters. And if you have any questions, please ask me. Otherwise, you have been as usual, wonderful audience for me, and it was a pleasure discussing these two chapters with you. So, please.
Sir, is an alternate director of a foreign place can he be considered as an agent for the contravention of the company side.
See, alternate director, if he is in the capacity as the resident director, correct?
Yeah.
So he is the only director available. Now understand only one thing. If a person signs any document, then he gets into a problem. The moment he signs, say for example a return is signed, a TDS is signed, return is signed, something is signed, he is responsible to the extent he has signed a document.
So avoid signing.
Last session I said, please don't carry a pen. And you are asking me whether I should avoid signing that.
Thank you.
Sorry to break in between, sir. Before our members leave, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for having come down to address our CA fraternity. Thank you for touching upon the various aspects pertaining to directors as per the New Companies Act. As a token of appreciation, I request Mr. Guru Prasad to kindly come onto the stage and give a small memento on behalf of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India.
I have a huge collection of this now.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.